It's NBA draft week. Haven't done one of these in a bit, feels like, even though they did have guys last year. We're going to talk about the Nuggets draft picks. Who are our guys? We'll talk about DaRon Holmes. Why is it that he's so heavily mocked to the Denver Nuggets in the mock drafts? Plus, the Nuggets declined Vlatko's option. But is his time in Denver really done? All that and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Monday for world's finest during draft week. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have winded down, the sporting calendar like we want them to. And then this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. His name's Adam Mares. He's director of content for DNVR. This is World's Finest. We're going to talk to you today about the NBA draft. We're going to go through our favorite players in the draft for the Nuggets, specifically at the spots that they're at. Have some conversations to be had about the Nuggets' first round pick, which they will be making at, I always forget this, number 28 in the NBA draft, as well as Adam has thoughts on the second rounder, which I do not. I do not have any thoughts on the second rounder. So Adam's going to be able to fill me in. And I'm going to learn something today. The more you know. Glad to have you guys with us. Make sure to give us a like if you're watching on youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets. Best way to support the show, hit that subscribe button. It helps us out so much. All right, Adam, let's start right here. So the NBA draft is Wednesday. Two parts. There's Wednesday's first round, and then there's Thursday's second round in the afternoon. For no apparent reason, we don't have 3 rounds. I'm very annoyed at this. Why do we not have 3 rounds if they're going to break it into 2 days? And
you want a third round of the draft? The second round is already mostly pointless.
I do, because I want it. I just want the G League rosters filled out with all NBA guys, because it just sets up a more solid structure for them. I want the guys to feel, I want there to be more secure spots and more opportunities for guys to really shine. To me, the people that love the draft, like CT Fazio, you can find on Twitter, who's amazing at it. The people that love the draft. People will get into it. We see this with the NFL. And yes, we would be down to the bare bones in terms of talent, but there would still be enough content, I think, to go around. So to me, yeah.
So wait, you said, as you introed this, that you don't have any thoughts on the second round pick?
Yeah, that's true.
But you want to, but you want a third round pick.
Yes. I want other people. Right. I want other people to have the content I won't consume or worry about.
Right.
It's like I want more. It's like I want a renewal for a show I don't watch. Well, the fans want it. So why can't they have more of what they love?
Matt, you want fewer games and more draft rounds. I'm just trying to sort through it. Just to make sure I got this right.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I feel seen and attacked, sir. But LA, I'm trying to be positive. Positivity. I'm not just being we shouldn't have 2 rounds. We should only have 1 round of the draft. The draft should be 15 picks.
That's it.
All right, let's talk about some of our favorite guys. We'll talk about specifically DaRon Holmes. We're going to talk about in the second segment.
I will go ahead and get in front of it. He's my favorite. Of all the realistic targets, he's my favorite. So we'll spend a whole segment on him.
Yeah, so I think he's worth it, and we'll talk about kind of why he's there. All right, let's talk about the other guys, though, that you kind of like. Give me a name that you are very high on for the Nuggets to draft with the number 28 pick.
All of these are tough because Cal does not care about where players are mocked to. Jalen Pickett was taken well ahead of where he was mocked. Peyton Watson was taken well ahead of where he was mocked. This has happened. But the guy that's next behind, for me, behind Holmes would be Ryan Dunn. And he's a guy that is mocked a little bit behind where Denver's picking. So I don't know if that's a situation where Denver would have to trade back or if it's close enough. I think 10 picks mocked usually in the late 30s. Now, he is like Peyton Watson. If I had a comp for him, it would be Peyton Watson. Maybe more, played at Virginia. So maybe there's a little bit, as opposed to UCLA, played a lot more minutes. So maybe there's something there. One of the best defenders I've ever seen. Defends similar to Peyton Watson, but I would say even maybe more disciplined. Maybe it's just because he, like I said, played more minutes, so grew a little bit more in his college years. but super athlete, blocks a ton of shots, gets a ton of steals, but also just shuts down whoever he's guarding. I like him, and I am of the opinion that while Denver needs offense, offense is everywhere. Defensive length is really hard to find, and yes, you already have a Peyton Watson, but I always think, why not have another one? Because that's the most valuable and most difficult type of player to find.
So it's interesting you say that. The Knicks really like Dunn, and they're actually looking to try and trade. But they think they can trade back to get him into that second round. That's why he's mocked consistently in the second round.
He has no offense. He's one of the worst offensive players I've seen.
Right. It is kind of interesting though to kind of look at it from a positional standpoint of just like what I think is interesting is there are, I think, going to be a lot of bigs here that are available. I think we'll talk about Holmes and why he's just like the best player available. But if you're looking for one of those, like, hey, we could really use a rookie big man to come off the bench and help out with that second unit, just bring some energy, right? And obviously the comp is going to be like, ooh, like Derek Lively, who went 10th. So maybe that's a bit much, but there are a bunch of guys. So I looked at this when I'm trying to like look at this list. One of the things I did look at was I do kind of look at who could drop, because I think this draft is so unstable. There's a possibility of guys just absolutely plummeting, right? And this is a guy that I've heard in like the 10 to 20 range. But like, look, if he starts to miss, Khalil Ware.
Oh, okay.
So if Khalil Ware were to start to drop and he just like misses out, because what I have heard is like some of the workouts weren't as good as they were kind of hoping for. Some of them have been great. Some of them haven't been. 7-1, right? Out of Indiana, 230. That's like a great center option. But if you're going to like reach up, the guy that I actually really like in the second round, he's way further down. And I'm a little bit surprised because I've heard him as high as 20 with people I've talked to, is Adam Bona. Bona is the guy that I really kind of like circled out of UCLA. 1.7 blocks per game. Got some touch around the rim. Like, I like Bona quite a bit. Like, I think there's center options for the Nuggets to grab if Holmes is already off the board.
I don't know Bona. I mean, that's an interesting one. I'll have to look him up here and get a good scout on him after this is over. A tireless player, huh? So a guy just with a great motor. Tell me a little bit more about him.
I'm going to totally admit that I'm not like fully prepped on like a full breakdown.
This is like mid-second round guy, but yeah.
Yeah, but for like what I've seen of him,
6'8",
for me, it's mostly the defensive stuff that he's got the ability.
7'4".
A little bit. But like for me, it's also just like I like the idea. We talked about like the rim protection concept, right? Like as a secondary rim protector. The versatility there, I really kind of like from him. I think that there's more versatility there than maybe kind of thought about.
If you go to Khalil Ware, to me, here's an interesting thing, because I saw one of the knocks on him was like, how much does he want it? And that critique specifically is an interesting one, especially to me for bigs, because I feel like we've seen that comment be wrong a lot, but when it's right, it can be damning. Like Ayton is a guy that people said, does he really want it? And I think the answer is no, and we kind of know that now. He was a number one pick, so it's a little bit different. But is that a guy that you think is always going to maximize his value? I don't know. But then you get guys like Anthony Edwards, that was the number one thing about him, was the guy doesn't like basketball. And it's like, come on, man. That was so clearly a wrong assessment of this guy's personality and who he is. So that's what I've heard about Khalil Ware. And when you watch him play, you know, one of the worst words you can call a player soft. He does play a little bit soft sometimes. But I will say that he's a guy that if they were to take, again, I think he would have to fall because he's projected a lot higher. But as you mentioned, he is falling. He's a guy that I'd at least be interested in. My only concern is that I think he's a little bit more on the raw side. And I think Malone in particular, raw is like a damning trait to give Michael Malone, given how many young players he already has.
Are there any guards that you like at this spot? There's been some conversation. I think Nuggets fans are interested in the idea of solving the backup point guard by drafting another one.
Yeah.
With the idea now, like you as I would say that you're king of Pickett Island. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, I as I've said last year, him getting zero development to me is a concern. Like, he was already old. One of the knocks on him was he's old, and then you take another year and just made him older. So. For me, and it is tough because it is hilarious to think that the problem to solve now is to give him another point guard. To me, that's pretty tough. You're almost guaranteed to not have one of your picks hit if you pick up another point guard. That being said, there are some guys that intrigue me a little bit, and the one that probably intrigues me the most is AJ Mitchell. And he's so much further down again on mocks that I feel weird talking about him as the 28th pick. It's more of maybe if Denver were to trade back a little bit. But he reminds me a little bit of Monte. He's just so solid. I think that he would be a guy like a high IQ point guard, has a smart game. I think he would fit in with Denver, kind of a Jokic ball player, even though he'd be off the bench. The only problem with him is, like Pickett, there's no burst to his game. And I think Denver has a lack of like ball handlers with burst. Even Jamal Murray doesn't have burst. So that would be my only concern, is getting another point guard that's not quick. He's crafty though, and I'm kind of a believer in. Are we on a delay?
Think a little bit. I think you're on one, but go ahead. What were you saying?
I am intrigued also by these point guards that come from mid-majors, smaller schools, in this case Santa Barbara, who are really high IQ players, because I think I have a theory that out of high school, you're 4-star, 3-star, whatever you are, a lot of that comes down to athleticism, because your feel for the game maybe doesn't stick out as much. Then you get to a place like Santa Barbara, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, this guy's a basketball genius, or he really understands and manipulates the game well. And there's almost, I think it's smart to expect those types of players to say, oh, there's diamonds in the rough there. Jalen Williams was one of these guys whose athleticism didn't necessarily pop out of high school, but then you watch and you go, yeah, but he gets the game on all levels. And I think AJ Mitchell could be one of those guys.
Do you have thoughts on Tyler Kolek?
Not really. I mean, to me, he's the other type. He's really crafty as well. I don't know why I like Mitchell more than I like Kolek, to be honest with you, because they do have some similarities to their game and how they're crafty and manipulate defenses.
Is there a player that you would trade up for?
No, in part because I just think it seems, I mean, DaRon Holmes, but what would you trade up for? Every time you do this, it's like, well, I would give my trash away. It's like I would trade Zeke Naji and
right.
Reggie Jackson to move up, but I don't think Denver can be in the business of moving up for young players.
All right. On the other side, the one player that's been most often placed with Denver in mock drafts is DaRon Holmes. We'll talk about him and what he could add to the Denver Nuggets next season and beyond, up next on Locked On Nuggets. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us. Adam Mares and Matt Moore with you here on a Monday. Adam, let's talk a little bit about DaRon Holmes, who I'd heard that he was mocked to them. I'll go ahead and say this, I heard this a while back and it just skipped over. And the things that I heard and made notes on was that the Nuggets had a promise for Holmes that if he's there, he's going to go. Now, that could be subterfuge. That could be smoke screen. That could have been an agent overstating the Nuggets' position.
Last year, or was it 2 years ago? I think it was 2 years ago. Andrew Nembhard was the consensus. This is who Denver's going to take. And they didn't take him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes this is how it works. A little smoke and mirrors, a little misdirection.
Give me your top level thoughts on DaRon Holmes.
So one of the things I like to think about, and it's not a necessity when I'm thinking about big men to bring in, especially young ones, is could they learn from Nikola Jokic? Is this a player that has a skill set in place that, you could see him coming to Denver and Denver's system and picking up on the different types of ways that you play? I think DaRon Holmes is a guy that could be this. Like, one, he's super athletic, so he has a different skill set than Jokic. Super athletic. He's got a jump shot, which makes me think he could probably play with Jokic. He's mobile out on the perimeter and he can shoot. So maybe there's some extra utility in having a player like that. He's not just playing the 12, 13 minutes a game Jokic rests. But then on top of that, he has a pretty good feel for the game, soft touch, and good passing. Not great. These aren't strengths of his. They're more like foundations that are there, that are in place. And for big men, you can recognize that. Most big men don't have those things in place. He has a foundation. And I look at that and I go, I don't love the way he screens all the time. And I think, okay, I think there's a world where he can become a little bit better at that. And in particular about manipulating the dribble handoff game, manipulating the short roll passing game. He has a foundation in place that makes me think coming to Denver would serve him well. So I look at him and I go, he could break either way as a prospect, be good or not be, or flame out. But I think in Denver, he would actually have a better chance of reaching the player that I think he's supposed to be. So I like his skill set to begin with, but I think there's a vacancy of skill set that he has a foundation for that he would pick up playing behind Yoke.
So I am never one to be the first on an island, right? Like you were first on Jokic Island, and I was like, "Come on!" And then eventually, I had to buy property there and rented it.
Who have you been early on? You've been early on guys or coaches or teams.
I don't know. Probably some throughout the league. Probably.
Yeah.
The problem is I always turn on them eventually because then they get overhyped, and then I'm contrarian.
That's true.
That's true. Rudy Gobert is a great example of this, where I was like, "Do you guys not realize how great Rudy Gobert is as a rookie?"
Then he wins 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. It's like, hold on.
And then like 5 seasons later, it's like he's one of the most impactful offensive players in the league. I'm like, whoa, blah, blah.
Right? Yeah.
So anyway, I never get to have an island, right? And the same is true for Peyton Watson. My point to DaRon Holmes is getting there. I'm renting Peyton Watson a condo on Peyton Watson Island. I think from Swipa is probably who I think was the most active on Peyton. My point here is that if you told me that the Nuggets could have DaRon Holmes and Peyton Watson as their developmental pipeline at the wing spots over the next 5 years, I'm like, okay, now that changes some of this trajectory of this stuff. Like that opens up some really interesting possibilities. The problem always being that like you have to kind of keep drafting well because they're going to make so much you have to pay them after you get rid of the old guys that you've paid. But I love Holmes 38% from 3 and he's 70% plus from the free throw line. Like that free throw number is always so important with these guys that they've got to be able to have that's the indicator that most of the draft analysts I trust use to evaluate touch. You mentioned some of the versatility. His actions, I noticed in dribble handoff sequences, both coming off of them and setting them were really good.
Yeah, I think there's a foundation there for him.
Like he's a guy that I could see in 3 years being like, he's a great screener and he can operate with the ball in his hands. And that versatility, I think, is huge. Trying to figure out why he's not higher has been like a pretty consistent question. And it is kind of a thing of if the Nuggets want him, they may have to trade up, which I don't necessarily know they have the assets to do so.
Right.
But
I don't think they could or would do that. I mean, who knows? You do have some young players who are at this point, like we keep talking about what is Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson. If all it took was for you to trade Hunter Tyson and the pick to move up, it'd be like, yeah, because already we're worried about you having too many guys. So maybe that's the play. And maybe that was part of Calvin's calculus, all along was, hey, if we can get a young guy that looks intriguing, maybe other teams would rather take that guy than the draft pick, the mystery box. So maybe, but outside of that, I don't see Denver moving up in the draft. It just would surprise me so much to use a different asset to go up and get another young player. One other thing. So playing with Jokic, what do you think about his ability to play with Jokic? Because that's one thing about it. You don't want to use a pick just on a guy that can only play 14 minutes a game max.
I like it. I really like it just because I will ask you this because I'm not good at shot mechanics. What do you think of his 3-point shot mechanics? If you have any takes at all?
I don't have strong takes, but I would say that I thought when I watched it, I thought it looked fluid. Like I thought there's some guys that make threes. Even Zeke is one of these guys where when he shoots it, it just looks a little rough. I think he has fluid body control. So for me, I think that I trust that he can become a good shooter. I don't think that's going to be a number one part of his game, though. The shooting.
No, I don't either.
It's like it's an additive,
right? So for me, I think it's if he can be a big. So let me think how to put this. he's not the shooter that MPJ is, but if you converted MPJ's shooting by a couple of percentage points into actually being able to not create for others, but create individually off the bounce, that to me is like a pretty decent comparison in terms of like size, athleticism, and being able to come off and be able to make those kind of shots.
I think even less. I would compare him more to Aaron Gordon, because if he plays with Jokic, he's going to be in that role. And where does Aaron Gordon play? Along the baseline and in the corners, and mostly along the baseline, right? So if you think he's going to be 80% there, 20% in the corners, can he be a good enough shooter for that 20%? I just think, yeah, he probably can. It's not going to be a great weapon, but it is going to be, can he be enough that teams don't just say, hey, leave that guy open all game?
Yeah. Could also be really great as a cutter. He has some, now look, it's Dayton, but he has some finishes off of the cut through guys for dunks that like had me doing in my chair. Like he has some like the explosiveness on some of these. He has also like a jump stop underneath dunk, like that level of, it's not like crazy athleticism, but it's good enough just where you need that kind of finishing power, right? Because I do think that one of the things that the Nuggets have kind of gotten to, in part just because of wear and tear, is there's a lot of dunks from Gordon, but I do kind of would like a little bit more athletic finishing around the rim. I just think that the Nuggets could use like a little bit more of that.
I agree. And I think he's a guy that would provide a lot of that. The other thing you said, Dayton, almost condescendingly, Dayton's had a pretty good program lately. And so I think traditionally Dayton hasn't been a powerhouse, but they have been very good lately, produced some NBA players lately. And they have a coach who has NBA pedigree in Anthony Grant, who comes from that VCU branch, but also coached in the NBA, which I like, and then is back in college. So I actually think watching, again, what I've scouted of them, you can always tell the teams that run what I think are like smarter reads in their offense, and Dayton's one of them. So I look at it and I go, I think DaRon Holmes would come in with a good foundational understanding of how to play smart basketball.
Yeah, let me restate that. What I meant by that more was when I was talking about the finishing, he's still playing in the Atlantic 10, right?
So, so it's against weak competition.
Yeah, I'm not expecting like NBA level rim protection on these types of cuts and finishes, but also like, hey, 3 years in the NBA and you catch up. So yeah, I think we're both on board. If DaRon Holmes is the pick, that would be, I think an A grade if he's there. But the question is just going to be if he's there or not.
Let me put it this way. This is an interesting one, and I'll just say it quickly. If they drafted him, to me, of their young guys, and I would call Christian Brown and below the young guys, he would probably come in third in guys I would have the most hope for panning out behind Christian and Peyton. Like those are the two guys, and some of this is unfair. They're already in the pipeline. But I would move him ahead of Strother in terms of my own personal rankings for who I would be betting on to become an impact player.
Okay. Maybe I'll take Strother Island. Maybe that's what I'll do, is I'll just like
hop on Strother Island.
All right. Up next, the Nuggets did make a decision regarding one of their players and his option for next season. But does that mean that his time in Denver is done? We'll talk about Vlatko Cancar up next on Locked On Nuggets. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. Doing great on WNBA. I'm off to a really hot start. I'm very excited about it. My model's performing very well. I am staying away from the Commissioner's Cup because I really like the Lynx, and apparently all the Sharps are on the Liberty. Liberty are a beast. By the way, that Caitlin Clark Angel Reese game yesterday, what a fantastic game. I had that literally, it was opened at Chicago -1, closed Fever -1, and Chicago came back in a thriller to win behind Angel Reese. Just absolutely phenomenal game. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Visit FanDuel.com right now. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Adam, I want to ask you this. We've gotten a few comments on this on youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets about the comparison between Nugget and DaRon Holmes.
Yeah.
How similar do you think those two players are?
I don't see the similarity at all, honestly. I mean, I guess in some of this they're similar bodied, like they're a little bit undersized to be a true center. But to me, I think they have different personalities, and that's the biggest thing. Is DaRon Holmes to me is a pure hustler with a good feel for the game, who has a little bit of toughness to him. Zeke Naji to me never had a great feel for the game, and his finesse game, I think, was part of what made you, is in particular his jump shot, is part of what made you so hopeful. If DaRon Williams was the same, DaRon Holmes was the same type of shooter as Zeke Naji, I still think he would work out. Whereas Zeke, the shooting clearly is becoming an inflection point. So I don't think they're that similar at all, to be honest with you.
I'm sure there were wise decisions behind it, but messing with Zeke's mechanics, still, I'm just like, that was a gamble that has not paid off well, and that's a bummer. The Nuggets declined Vlatko Čančar's option for next season. However, via Bennett Durando of the Denver Post. However, Bennett did report that doesn't mean that the two sides are going to be parting. There is a possibility of Vlatko coming back potentially, especially if it's on a minimum deal, since Denver's options are going to be limited, obviously, depending on what happens in free agency. What was your reaction to the Vlatko news? And do you foresee, with your Nuggets insider knowledge, do you foresee him being back with the Nuggets next season?
I do. I think the plan all along was to do this. And really, it was Jake Coyne, our friend of the show, who first kind of introduced the idea of it's better for Denver and for Vlatko if Denver were to reject this team option and then just re-sign him. So I think it was always part of the plan, and I expect it to continue to be part of the plan to get him on this minimum deal.
We got to get Stat Squatch on the show. We got to do that for free agency. We got to get him on the show. By the way, programming note, Aaron Burr on Twitter. Grace, you may know her from the comments. She's also she's got her own podcast and video that we're going to promote tomorrow. She's going to join me tomorrow on Locked On Nuggets. She and I are going to go head to head over whether or not the Nuggets should go into the second apron to re-sign KCP. So be on the lookout for that on tomorrow's show. Look, I think Vlatko, I don't really know where to stand with Vlatko at this point, where I like the minutes with him. Let me go a different direction with you.
Okay.
If the Nuggets had a different coach, do you think it's possible that Vlatko's career looks entirely different at this point? I mean, that's likely with almost every player, but how different do you think it looks right now?
I don't know.
I didn't mean to set a bear trap for you.
I know that does feel like a bear trap. I think Vlatko's a good player. I think he could play rotation minutes. I wish he would have played a little bit more when he was healthy. This was the year where I expected him to play a lot more, and he got hurt. But he's a good player. I don't think he's a great player. I don't know that he's a playoff rotation player. To me, he maybe is on par with like a Justin Holiday type who ended up being a playoff player this year. But I think he's good, not great. So I think
you would always describe him as a low mistake player.
Yeah.
And I would always, for whatever reason, would notice various things that he would various mistakes that he would make, which would stand out to me. But I do think that you're overall right. When I get a step back from it, I do think that your overall assessment is correct, as it so often is with the Nuggets. And so it really is a bummer that he wasn't available last year, because he really would have provided so much of what they needed. I roll my eyes a little at that. I don't want to make it into if they'd only had Vlatko, they would have gotten past the Wolves. Well, okay, let's, maybe not.
I mean, of course, he's not that type of player. That's why we have to put this in its proper box. But
right.
what I would say is, I felt this way about Michael Porter the year he missed when Murray was out. I went into it thinking, okay, here's the chance for him to really be forced into a role for us to really learn about him. And I felt the same way about Vlatko last year. I was like, okay, this is a year where Vlatko's going to be needed. I'm kind of curious to see how he looks with those guys. He can shoot the three. He can handle on the perimeter and do some things that open it up perhaps for that second unit. But, we lost it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's reason to bring him back that's beyond just his friendship with Nikola. I think that there's reasons to bring him back, because that was kind of the assumption is well, he's Jokic's guy. But I do think there's legit reasons to have him on roster.
I do too, but I will say that I still think that's the primary reason. Sure. And I don't think it's a small reason. Nikola is still in a country and culture that is not, his first. And there is something to just having as many people around him as possible to kind of make it normal. That's his best friend.
So DJ is great, right? DeAndre Jordan, having him around is awesome for the locker room, etc. DeAndre and Nikola share an agent, right? I mentioned this because I was doing some dives on draft stuff, noticing this guy who's mocked to this team is repped by the same guy who has three players on this team.
Right.
Like this stuff is not hard to figure out. It's not hard to kind of like deduce all this kind of things.
Well, on a funny note on that one, another player I like, probably more for the second pick, I really like Jonathan Mugbo. Same agent as Bones Highland.
Go ahead and cross that one off.
I like him a lot. I'm a big fan.
I mean, they did facilitate a trade for Bones and got him to a team where he would have an opportunity and be able to play in the playoffs.
And a private jet.
Harsh.
Sorry. That was harsh. I love Bones.
Bones was so fun. Bones was such a he was a media
tragedy. Favorite. I thought it was a comedy, but it turned
out to be a tragedy. That's pretty amazing. Before we get out of here, have you looked at any of the top guys in the draft, or have you only focused on the guys in the Nuggets range?
I've really only focused on the guys in the Nuggets range. I know Cody Williams, obviously from Denver. I know Dalton Connect because he's from my neighborhood. Go figure. But outside of that, I don't really have a strong take.
Okay.
I've seen a little bit about Alex Sarr, and I don't really love what I've seen.
Yeah, it's gonna be really. Reed Shepard's my number one guy. I like all the Kentucky dudes. I like Dillingham too.
Really?
I'm really high on Dillingham. Dillingham is the exact type of player where I'm like, I love this guy. He's going to be terrible. Like that's exactly what's going to happen. Is like he's too small, can't play defense, going to get targeted, going to be awful. But I really like his game. He's just a lot of fun to watch. I think the next 2 days are going to be really interesting. We're going to see. I think there's going to be a lot of moves around. One team I think to look. One of the most interesting teams here is in the division, and it's Utah. I just think that Utah is going to be really fascinating to see what they do, right? Like whether they move up, whether they move down, do they make a trade? Do they trade Laurie, which I don't necessarily think they will. All those types of options. I think the Wolves have some pretty good choices with where they're at in the draft. I think that's
Utah's at 10. Is that prime trading ground? I feel like it is. I mean, that's prime trading background, I guess.
Yeah. You can. For example, that is like the literal spot that is the on over under for Nikola Topic. So.
Let me ask you this last one before we get out. What are the odds there's a team out there that really likes Zeke Naji? Because there's always second draft guys. Zeke hasn't, like, if you're looking at, he hasn't played that many great minutes. What are the chances there's somebody out there?
30%.
That's higher than I think most people would think.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny? I agree with you. I think there is a way to look at it. Again, it's second draft. You're probably getting him for nothing or getting an asset with him. And there's probably people out there that are like, you know what? I don't know. He used to be able to shoot, can move on the perimeter. He's got good size. Was in a bad spot.
I agree. Look, I agree. But it's going to take a team that's got a galaxy brain mindset. My first thought is always Toronto. Is that those are the type of players that Masai and... Are you
talking about Nigerian Zeke Naji and Nigerian Masai Ujiri? There's a connection there for sure. He's even gone back to Nigeria and done some nonprofit work. So I'm sure those two have connected.
I wasn't even necessarily making that direct connection. It's more just a matter of Masai's always and Bobby Webster have always been guys that are willing to take those kind of chances. Like they believe in guys, which I think is good because I think too often teams are just like desperately searching for sure things to not get fired. And that causes a lot of problems. Yeah. All right, it's going to do it for Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. Tune in tomorrow where Grace, a.k.a. Aaron, a.k.a. Grace, will be on with me. We'll debate should the Nuggets re-sign KCP, and we'll look ahead to the draft tomorrow. And then Wednesday, World's Finest again, as we'll do our last-minute draft prep with whatever news comes out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.